My doctor mom brought me into her workplace at the psych ward, then lost track of her most dangerous patient. My mom picked me up from school early for bring your kid to work day at the psychiatric hospital where she worked. Remember the rules? Stay close. Don't talk to patients. She went over her patient list as we walked through security. Recreation hour starts in 10 minutes. You can observe from the nurse's station while I check on a few patients. She handed me a visitor badge. And soon, patients started filing in wearing regular clothes, not the straitjackets I'd imagined. Mom pointed out her primary patient from across the room, Nathan. He was younger than the others and sat alone doing a crossword puzzle. She'd talked about him at home sometimes. Brilliant but troubled. Been there 6 months for something she couldn't discuss. I'll just be a few minutes. Stay right here. She walked over to Nathan's table. He smiled and showed her something in the puzzle. Other patients played cards or watched TV. It was weirdly normal for a place full of crazy people. But about 5 minutes later, Mom came back looking for something in her pockets. Have you seen my pen? The good one? No. Did you leave it with that patient? I pointed to where Nathan had been sitting. The chair was empty. The puzzle abandoned, half finished. Mom's face went white as she scanned the room. Nathan wasn't at any of the other tables. He wasn't by the TV. He wasn't in the recreation room at all. Code gray, code gray, she whispered urgently to the nearest nurse. Suddenly, the calm room erupted into controlled chaos. Nurses started counting patients. Security appeared from nowhere. The recreation hour ended abruptly as patients were ushered back to their rooms. But no Nathan. Mom grabbed my shoulders. Did you see where he went? No. I looked away for like 10 seconds. My voice came out scared. They locked down the ward. Security searched every room and closet. Mom pulled up security footage on the nurse's computer. There was Nathan at his table. There was Mom walking away. Then him standing up and just walking somewhere out of frame. The head nurse studied the footage. Check my office and he knows I keep... Mom didn't finish but ran down the hall. I followed despite being told to stay put. Her office door was wide open. The window behind her desk was open too. 3 stories up, but there was a maintenance ladder just outside. Papers scattered on the floor, including what looked like her prescription pad. No, no, no. Mom rifled through her desk drawers. What did he take? Security arrived behind us. My badge. My keys. She checked her coat pockets. My wallet with my driver's license. Home address. The room went silent. Nathan hadn't just escaped. He'd taken everything he needed to find us. To come to our house. Mom pulled out her phone and called Dad, but it went to voicemail. He's been planning this. All those questions about my family. I thought he was making progress. Mom's voice shook. They pulled Nathan's file. Page after page of notes about violent fantasies, obsessive behaviors, drawings they showed me briefly before Mom covered my eyes. 6 months of pretending to get better. 6 months of studying you. The psychiatrist reviewing the file looked grim. Mom drove me home in a police escort. The house looked normal from the outside, but the front door was unlocked. We hadn't left it that way. The officers went in first while we waited in the car. They came back shaking their heads. He's been here. Your home office is ransacked. Family photos are missing. The officer looked apologetic. Inside was worse. Nathan had gone through everything. Mom's drawers emptied. My school schedule pulled off the fridge. Our family calendar with everyone's activities circled in red pen. Why my mom? What does he want? I asked while she packed us bags to stay in a hotel. He fixates on female authority figures. Thinks they're secretly in love with him. The last doctor. She didn't finish. We left with police protection to a hotel downtown. Mom called Dad and told him not to come home. Called my school to say I'd be absent. Around midnight, her phone rang. She answered on speaker with the police recording. We heard breathing on the other end. Then Nathan's voice. I have something for your daughter. A present. Check your car. He hung up. The police went to investigate while we watched from the hotel window. They approached Mom's car carefully. Opened the trunk with gloves. Inside was a box wrapped in birthday paper, even though my birthday was months away. They brought it up in an evidence bag. Inside were hundreds of photos. Pictures of me at school, at the mall, at friends' houses. At the bottom was a note. She looks just like you. Same smile, same eyes, same schedule every Tuesday and Thursday. Mom collapsed. Nathan hadn't just studied her. He'd been studying me too, and we'd never noticed. The detective's phone rang. Another escape from a different hospital 2 towns over. The doctor there also had a teenage daughter. Also had her badge and keys stolen. Also found her patient had been photographing her family for months. He's not working alone. The detective's face was grim. This is coordinated. That's when Mom got another text. This one from her own phone number. The phone Nathan had stolen. It was a selfie of him standing outside my best friend's house, smiling and holding today's newspaper. Your daughter has such nice friends. We should all meet properly soon. I didn't even think. Just broke free from Mom and started running to my friend's house 2 blocks away when red and blue lights exploded behind me. My sneakers slapped the wet pavement as I pumped my arms harder. 2 cops jumped out of their car and grabbed my arms before I even made it past the first corner. They explained Mom had called them the second I bolted, and they were already sending units to Alyssa's street. I fought against their grip, but they pulled me into the back of the patrol car. The detective's radio crackled with updates as more patrol cars surrounded Alyssa's block. I pressed my face against the window, shaking and begging them to check if she was okay. They wouldn't let me near the house until they confirmed it was safe. My hands left sweaty prints on the glass as I watched officers surround her house. 20 minutes dragged by before Detective Estelle Rawlings showed up and introduced herself as the lead on our case. She had short gray hair and tired eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. She confirmed Alyssa and her parents Gary and Maxine were safe inside, though shaken by police suddenly surrounding their home. Nathan wasn't there anymore, but he'd left signs he'd been watching. The detective let me out of the car and we walked to Alyssa's house together. Gary stood on his porch in pajama pants and a t-shirt, pointing at fresh footprints under Alyssa's bedroom window. Cigarette butts littered the ground by the fence where someone had stood for hours. The basement door had scratch marks around the lock like someone tried picking it. Alyssa ran out and hugged me, crying into my shoulder while her mom kept checking all the windows. Detective Rawlings gathered us all in their living room and explained the new safety protocol. No school for me or Alyssa until further notice. No social media posts about anything. New phone numbers for everyone. Completely random daily routines with no patterns Nathan could track. Gary argued about his work schedule at the bank while Alyssa gripped my hand so tight it hurt. This was bigger than just Nathan now, and everyone knew it. Mom burst through the front door with 2 officers and immediately pulled me into a crushing hug. She started apologizing to Gary and his wife over and over. She explained how Nathan studied his targets for months, learning everything about them. Maxine asked how long he'd been watching their daughter, and Mom couldn't answer. The detective's phone rang with news about Nathan's stolen credit card being used at a gas station near the industrial district. She sent units there immediately but warned us these patients were too smart to stay where cameras caught them. Mom's face went white when the detective said patients, plural. We packed quickly and moved to a police-arranged safe house across town. The apartment smelled like old carpet and cleaning chemicals. Metal bars covered the windows and panic buttons were installed in every room. Dad was flying back from his business trip but wouldn't arrive for hours. I jumped at every car door slamming outside and couldn't stop checking the locks. Detective Rawlings brought in tech specialists who started tracking Mom's stolen phone using its IMEI number. They set up laptops on the kitchen table and typed commands I didn't understand. The signal pinged from a storage facility on the outskirts of town near the old train tracks. She took a tactical team while we waited, watching the clock tick past 2 a.m. I chewed my nails down to nothing. The storage unit raid uncovered something worse than we imagined. The detective called to tell us what they found. Detailed schedules and photos of 5 different families covered the walls. All had teenage daughters whose mothers worked in psychiatric care. There were floor plans of houses drawn in careful detail. School schedules with arrival and departure times circled. Notes about each girl's habits, friends, and favorite places. Mine had the most details, including what I ate for lunch and which bathroom stall I used at the school. The detective said they also found wigs, fake IDs, and stolen license plates. Nathan had been planning this for months with help from other patients. The door to our safe house banged open, and this woman in a gray suit pushed past the officers holding a briefcase. Maxine Underwood from the hospital risk management started pulling out papers and shoving them at Mom. She kept saying words like liability and protocol breach and documentation requirements. Mom's hands shook as she tried to read the forms while Maxine tapped her pen on the table. The woman wanted statements about every session with Nathan and kept asking why Mom didn't report his questions about our family. Mom's face got red and she stood up so fast her chair fell over. Detective Rawlings stepped between them and told Maxine this was a criminal investigation now, and the hospital stuff could wait. Maxine argued about deadlines and insurance claims, but the detective walked her to the door and basically pushed her out. Mom sat back down and put her head in her hands while the detective's phone started ringing. She listened for a minute, then pulled up something on her laptop. A neighbor near Alyssa's house had doorbell camera footage from last night showing a car parked there for 3 hours. The detective zoomed in on the grainy video and we could see part of a license plate. She typed the numbers into some police database while I tried calling Alyssa on the new phone number her dad gave us. The phone rang and rang, but nobody answered. I tried again and finally Gary picked up and said Alyssa wasn't allowed to use phones right now. He'd installed motion sensor lights all around their house and was keeping her in her room with the door locked. The detective's computer beeped with search results. The partial plate matched a rental car from the airport using a fake name, but the credit card traced back to an alias connected to the second escaped patient. She pulled up his file on her screen and showed us his photo. He was older than Nathan with dead-looking eyes and pages of notes about following teenage girls home from the school. The detective said this confirmed they were working together and had been planning this for months. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but the detective nodded for me to answer. It was Alyssa calling from her parents' landline in the kitchen. Her voice sounded small and scared as she told me her dad was sleeping in the hallway with a baseball bat. She said her mom kept crying and checking the locks every 5 minutes. I told her we'd get through this together even though I had no idea how that was possible. She said she missed normal life and wished we could just go back to last week. Her dad must have heard her because suddenly the line went dead. A knock at the door made everyone jump, but it was just a woman with a folder full of papers. The victim advocate introduced herself and started spreading worksheets across the table about safety planning and restraining orders. She explained how to vary our routines and recognize if someone was following us. Mom kept interrupting to add stuff about Nathan's behavior patterns and how he studied body language. The advocate wrote everything down, but I could see her getting more nervous with each thing Mom said. Mom went to her room and came back with a box of session notes from the past 6 months. She spread them across the floor and started highlighting parts with a yellow marker. Page after page showed Nathan asking about our weekend plans and what I like to do after school. Questions about Mom's favorite restaurants and where we went on vacation. She showed the detective one page where Nathan asked if we had any pets, and another where he wanted to know about my friends. Every question seemed normal at the time, but now we could see the pattern. Mom's voice cracked as she admitted he'd played her perfectly, and she'd thought they were making progress. The detective took photos of all the highlighted sections for evidence. The front door slammed open and Dad rushed in, still wearing his business suit from his trip. He immediately started yelling about why we were still in town and not driving to another state. Mom tried to explain, but he kept interrupting, saying we needed to leave right now. The detective had to raise her voice to get his attention. She explained that running would make things worse since Nathan had help and resources. They needed us here as bait to catch him using controlled scenarios. Dad's face turned purple and he started arguing about using his family as bait. The detective's phone buzzed with an alert. An ATM camera downtown had just captured Nathan using Mom's stolen debit card to withdraw cash. She pulled up the footage on her laptop and there he was. He'd changed clothes and was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but you could still see his face clearly. The timestamp showed it was only 3 hours ago at a bank 6 blocks from here. The detective immediately called for units to search that area while we studied the image. Nathan looked calm, like he was just running normal errands instead of being hunted by police. The detective printed out the photo and started making calls. Within an hour, a judge had signed an emergency restraining order, and police issued a BOLO alert to every unit in 3 counties. Detective Rawlings assigned officers to watch our family and Alyssa's family 24/7. Gary thanked her when she called to tell him, but said he was also hiring private security because he didn't trust anyone to protect his daughter. We spent the rest of the day going over safety protocols and emergency procedures. Around 7 that evening, the doorbell rang and everyone froze. The officer checked the door and found a pizza delivery guy holding 2 large pizzas. Nobody had ordered food. The delivery guy said it was already paid for and handed over the receipt. There was a note taped to the box that said, "Enjoy your meal," in Nathan's handwriting. The detective grabbed the boxes with gloves and called for backup. She traced the order to a burner phone bought with cash, but the call location pinged from right outside our building. Nathan knew exactly where we were hiding. We had 15 minutes to pack before they moved us to another safe house across town. The new safe house was smaller and smelled like old carpet cleaner. We threw our bags in the corner while officers checked every window and door. Mom's laptop chimed with a video call request from the hospital board at exactly 9 the next morning. She had to sit at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere while 3 administrators stared at her through the screen. They made her go through every single session with Nathan from the past 6 months. She explained each note in his file while they asked why she didn't see the warning signs. One administrator kept interrupting to ask about specific protocols she might have missed. Mom's hands shook as she flipped through pages of treatment notes. They questioned her judgment on letting him participate in group activities. They wanted to know why she didn't report his questions about her family. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The hearing went on for 3 hours with Mom defending every decision she'd made. At the end, they told her she was suspended pending full review and her medical license was now under investigation. She closed the laptop and just sat there staring at nothing. The victim advocate arrived later with a notebook for me. She said keeping a detailed log would help build the legal case and give me some control over the situation. I started writing down everything weird I noticed, like the white van that drove past our safe house twice, the blue car that parked across the street for 20 minutes with nobody getting out, the way our neighbor kept looking at our door when he walked his dog. My hands shook while I wrote, but it felt better than doing nothing. The advocate said even tiny details could matter later in court. I filled 5 pages that first day alone. Gary called to say he was installing cameras at his house right then. He'd already canceled their family trip to Disney World next month. He kept saying nothing mattered except keeping Alyssa safe from Nathan. The locksmith was there changing every lock while electricians ran wires for the new security system. He asked if I wanted to stay with them once this was all over. Having someone else who understood what we were going through made me feel less alone. His voice cracked when he offered to help however we needed. Detective Rawlings called Mom with news from the storage unit search. Her team had found a key that matched the exact brand of Alyssa's house door lock. Nathan had already made copies and could have gone inside anytime he wanted. Gary was standing next to Alyssa's mom when the detective told them. She broke down crying while Gary immediately called another locksmith to change everything again. They'd been sleeping in that house not knowing Nathan had keys the whole time. The detective said this showed how long he'd been planning everything. That afternoon, Mom's phone rang from a number we didn't recognize. It was a reporter from the local news asking about the escaped patient case. She knew Mom's name and that Nathan had targeted our family. The detective grabbed the phone and told the reporter not to call again. She explained that media coverage could make Nathan escalate his behavior if he saw it. Someone at the hospital had probably leaked information for money. The detective assigned an officer just to monitor news and social media for any mentions of the case. Mom worried that Nathan would see himself on TV and do something even worse. 2 days later, Detective Rawlings came to our safe house with a plan. She wanted to use Mom's stolen phone to send Nathan a message through cloud storage. The message would suggest meeting somewhere public with dozens of undercover cops ready to grab him. Mom sat there thinking for a long time before agreeing to try anything that might end this nightmare. The detective's tech person uploaded a file to Mom's cloud account that Nathan could access from her stolen phone. The message said Mom wanted to talk and understand why he did all this. Within 3 hours, Nathan had responded. His message was long and rambling about how he knew Mom loved him too. He suggested meeting at the farmer's market on Saturday morning near the flower stands. He wrote like he really believed this was some kind of romantic meeting. The detective started making calls to coordinate the operation. She needed at least 30 officers in regular clothes scattered through the market. Some would be vendors and others would pretend to be shoppers. They'd have snipers on nearby roofs and unmarked cars blocking every exit. That night, Mom sat on my bed and we had a hard conversation. I told her straight up that I wouldn't be bait for Nathan no matter what the police wanted. She grabbed my hand and promised immediately that they'd use an undercover officer who looked like her. She said my safety came first with no discussion needed. It was the first time since this started that she put me first without any hesitation. Saturday morning, we watched everything from the police station on security cameras. The undercover officer looked enough like Mom from a distance. She wore Mom's jacket and carried a similar purse. Officers were everywhere pretending to buy vegetables and browse crafts. The detective pointed out each undercover cop on the monitors. We waited for 2 hours, but Nathan never showed up. Then around noon, his accomplice appeared near the flower stand. He walked up to the undercover officer and said something quick. The moment he realized it wasn't really Mom, he turned and ran. Officers chased him through the crowd, knocking over displays and scaring shoppers. He jumped over tables and pushed through people trying to escape. More officers appeared from every direction, but he made it to the parking lot. He ran straight to the river behind the market and jumped in, even though officers were everywhere. They lost him in the current while helicopters searched from above. The detective slammed her hand on the desk in frustration. Later that afternoon, the tech team made a discovery that changed everything. Nathan and his accomplice had been using an encrypted forum where psychiatric patients shared information about their doctors. The detective pulled up post after post about Mom from 3 months ago. There were photos of our house taken from the street, our car in the driveway with the license plate visible, even a picture of me walking home from the school. Other doctors were being discussed too, with their addresses and family information posted. The forum had hundreds of members all sharing ways to manipulate their doctors and plan escapes. Nathan had been getting advice and help from patients all over the state. The detective printed out every single post while Mom read them with tears running down her face. The detective started making calls to other departments while Mom kept scrolling through more posts about our family. Her phone buzzed with an email from the hospital and she opened it with shaking fingers. The review board had scheduled an emergency meeting for the next morning about her handling of Nathan's case. Mom drove us back to the safe house in silence while Dad waited for us there. The next morning, she put on her best suit and logged into the video meeting from the detective's office. I watched from the doorway as 3 board members questioned every decision she'd made with Nathan. They showed charts of warning signs she'd supposedly missed, and asked why she hadn't flagged his obsessive questions about her family. Mom explained how Nathan had seemed to be making real progress, and how he'd manipulated multiple doctors before her. The board members kept shaking their heads and typing notes. After 2 hours, they told her she was suspended pending a full investigation into her treatment methods. Mom accepted it quietly and thanked them for their time. But when she got off the call, I saw her go into the bathroom and heard her crying through the door. Dad went in after her and I heard him telling her over and over that none of this was her fault, and that Nathan had fooled everyone. 3 days later, I had my first video therapy appointment with a counselor the victim advocate had arranged. The woman on the screen had kind eyes and asked me to tell her what scared me most about everything that had happened. I told her about not being able to sleep and jumping at every sound and feeling like Nathan could be anywhere. She taught me this breathing thing where you count to 4 breathing in and hold it for 4, and then breathe out for 4. We practiced it together, and she explained how predators like Nathan pick their targets carefully and study them to find weaknesses. She said what happened wasn't my fault, or Mom's fault, and that Nathan was sick in a way that made him dangerous. The breathing exercises actually helped when I felt my chest getting tight. That same afternoon, Gary called the detective in a panic because Alyssa had found something in their mailbox. We rushed over with 2 officers and Gary showed us a letter made from magazine words cut out and glued to paper. It said, "Stop hiding her from me," with no signature or return address. The detective put on gloves and bagged it for evidence but said there probably wouldn't be fingerprints or DNA. Gary was pacing back and forth saying he was thinking about sending his family to stay with relatives in another state. The detective told him that might actually make things worse since Nathan could follow them somewhere with less protection. 2 days later, the detective got a call from a pawn shop owner who'd seen Nathan's photo on the news. Someone matching the accomplice's cousin had sold Mom's expensive pen there last week and signed the receipt with a fake name. The detective said this gave them a new lead on the network helping Nathan and showed us surveillance footage from the pawn shop. The guy in the video looked young and nervous and kept checking over his shoulder. She said they were closing in on Nathan's helpers but needed us to stay strong just a little bit longer. That night, Dad got restless and decided he needed to get more clothes from our house since we'd been wearing the same things for days. He slipped out while Mom was in the shower and drove there alone without telling anyone. The officers stationed at our house called the detective immediately when they saw him pull up. She called him directly, and I could hear her scolding him through the phone about breaking protocol and putting himself in danger. When Dad got back to the safe house, he exploded about feeling useless and not being able to protect his own family. He punched the wall and left a dent while yelling that he should be doing something instead of hiding. The detective sat him down and reminded him that following the safety plan was the best way to keep us all alive. After that, we all sat down and made strict rules that everyone had to follow. Dad could help, but only with a police escort, and nobody went anywhere alone for any reason. We had to check in every 2 hours by text, and if anyone was even 5 minutes late, we'd call the police. Having the structure helped even though we were all exhausted from the constant fear. My hands shook all the time now, and Mom had dark circles under her eyes. The next morning, a rideshare driver called the tip line saying he'd dropped someone matching Nathan's description near the park where I used to have soccer practice. The detective pulled up a map and realized Nathan had been studying my old routine to figure out where I might go next. She called the coach immediately and told him to cancel practice at that field. We had to stop using any familiar locations since Nathan knew all our patterns. The detective and Mom started talking about Tuesday coming up, which was when I normally had soccer practice. They figured Nathan might try to approach then since he'd mentioned knowing my Tuesday schedule in his note. The detective arranged to move practice to the gym at the police station instead, where there would be officers everywhere. Some of the other parents complained about the inconvenience, but the coach backed up the safety measure completely. That night, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when Mom knocked softly and came to sit on the edge of my mattress. She took my hand and apologized for bringing Nathan into our lives through her work. She said she should have seen the signs and been more careful with boundaries. She promised to always put our safety first from now on, and to never let work put us at risk again. We both started crying and held each other for a long time. The next day, the detective got data from the tracking device in Mom's stolen car key fob, showing everywhere Nathan had driven it over the past week. She spread out a map with red dots marking each location, and we could see he'd been to 3 other psychiatric facilities in nearby counties. He'd also driven through multiple residential neighborhoods that the detective said connected to other families being targeted. Each red dot represented another family going through the same nightmare we were living. Maxine from the hospital showed up at our safe house the next morning with a thick folder of papers and 2 lawyers behind her. She pushed past the officer at the door and demanded Mom sign something right away. Mom took the papers and started reading while Maxine tapped her foot and kept checking her watch. The documents were full of legal words about not talking to the media and not saying anything bad about the hospital. Mom's face got redder with each page she turned. She looked up at Maxine and said she wouldn't sign anything that stopped her from warning other families. Maxine started talking about the hospital's reputation and how this could hurt their funding. Mom stood up and told her that keeping families safe was more important than money. The lawyers tried to explain how the papers would protect everyone, but Mom wasn't listening anymore. Detective Rawlings walked in right then and looked at the papers on the table. She picked them up and read through them quickly before handing them back to Maxine. She told Maxine that trying to silence victims was a bad look for the hospital. Maxine grabbed her papers and left with the lawyers trailing behind her. About an hour later, the detective's phone started ringing with updates from her team. They'd been tracking the cousin of Nathan's accomplice through his phone for the past 12 hours. The signal led them to a cheap motel on the highway where truckers usually stopped. The detective sent 6 officers to surround the building while she coordinated from our location. We watched her pace back and forth while giving orders through her radio. The officers moved in at exactly noon and found the accomplice in room 14 eating takeout food. He tried to run out the back window, but an officer was already waiting there. They got him in handcuffs while he kept yelling for a lawyer over and over. The detective told him they had enough from the storage unit to put him away for years. She said his only chance was to start talking about Nathan and the whole operation. The accomplice went quiet after that, and they took him to the station for booking. Mom asked if this meant Nathan would give up now that he lost his helper. The detective shook her head and said it might make him more dangerous since he was alone. That's when Gary called and said he wanted to help catch Nathan somehow. He'd been thinking about it all night and couldn't stand waiting around anymore. The detective listened to his idea about using his house as bait since Nathan knew where it was. She thought about it for a minute, then agreed, but only with strict conditions. She'd put officers inside his house, and Alyssa had to stay at the safe house. Gary agreed right away and said he'd do whatever it took to end this. The detective started planning the operation with her team while Gary drove to the station. They decided to put a package on Gary's porch with a fake letter inside. The letter would be addressed to me and say that Alyssa wanted me to come visit her. They figured Nathan would see it and try to grab it since he was obsessed with both of us. Officers started arriving at Gary's house around 8 that night to get into position. 2 hid in the garage behind boxes, while another got into the basement through the back door. 3 more officers sat in unmarked vans down the street with cameras pointed at the house. Gary put the package on his porch at exactly 10 o'clock, then went inside to wait. The detective drove Mom to the police command post where they had all the camera feeds set up. I got taken to a small room at a different station with 2 officers watching me. The room had no windows and only one door that they locked from the outside. I couldn't sit still and kept walking in circles around the tiny space. The officers tried to get me to eat something, but my stomach was too tight. One of them let me use her phone to text Mom every 30 minutes. Mom texted back that nothing was happening yet and to stay calm. The hours dragged by slower than anything I'd ever experienced. My legs hurt from pacing, but I couldn't stop moving. At 2 in the morning, Mom stopped texting back, which made me panic. The officer said it probably meant something was happening and Mom was busy. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to hear anything from outside. At 2:14 a.m., the motion sensors at Gary's house picked up movement in the backyard. A figure in dark clothes was creeping along the fence line toward the front. He stayed away from the streetlights and the obvious camera on the garage. But he didn't know about the tiny cameras hidden in the garden decorations. The detective told everyone through their earpieces to hold their positions. Nathan moved closer to the porch and stopped to look around. He waited for 5 whole minutes just watching the house. Then he walked up the steps and reached for the package. The second his hand touched it, officers burst out from everywhere at once. Nathan tried to run, but Detective Rawlings herself came around the corner and tackled him. He fought back hard, and she had to use pepper spray to stop him. 2 other officers helped get him in handcuffs while he screamed about Mom. He kept saying she betrayed him, and that she loved him, but was too scared to admit it. The officers dragged him to a patrol car while he kept yelling. They searched his pockets and found Mom's badge and keys and wallet. He had a second phone with hundreds of photos on it, including families we didn't know about. The detective said this evidence would put him away for decades at least. She called Mom at the command post to tell her it was over. Mom collapsed into a chair when she heard Nathan was finally caught. The accomplice at the station heard about Nathan's arrest and suddenly wanted to make a deal. He started telling the detective everything about how the forum worked. He gave them names of other dangerous patients and explained how Nathan organized everything. He said Nathan picked the targets and planned all the escapes. His testimony would help protect dozens of families from similar situations. The detective recorded everything while the prosecutor prepared charges. 3 days later, Mom had to give her formal statement to the prosecutors about Nathan's treatment. She sat in a conference room for 6 hours going through every session and decision. She admitted she missed warning signs because Nathan was so good at manipulation. She explained how he used her empathy against her by pretending to make progress. The detective sat beside her the whole time and kept telling the prosecutors that Nathan fooled multiple professionals. She pointed out that the other doctor at the second hospital fell for the same tricks. The prosecutor said they understood, but the hospital review would still continue. Mom nodded and said she accepted whatever consequences came from this. 2 weeks passed before Gary called to say the security company finished installing cameras at every angle of their house. He showed me the app on his phone where he could check all 16 feeds at once, and the motion sensors that sent alerts for anything bigger than a cat. His wife kept adjusting the new deadbolts on every door and testing the panic buttons they put in each room. Alyssa was allowed to go in the backyard alone now, but only during daylight, and Gary still watched from the kitchen window. Our families started having dinner together every Sunday, and nobody talked about Nathan, but we all knew why we needed to be close. The first day back at the school came with a security guard named Logan, who followed me between classes and stood outside the bathroom. Kids whispered and pointed in the hallways, and some asked if I was famous or in witness protection. Alyssa met me at my locker every morning, and we walked to first period together while Logan stayed 10 feet behind us. The counselor gave us passes to eat lunch in her office away from the staring and questions. We picked at our sandwiches and tried to talk about normal stuff like homework, but kept checking our phones for texts from our parents. 3 days into the school week, we got pulled out of class for Nathan's arraignment at the courthouse downtown. Mom sat in the front row with the prosecutor while Dad and I stayed in the back with other families. Nathan shuffled in wearing an orange jumpsuit with chains connecting his wrists to his waist and his ankles together. His lawyer stood up and said Nathan pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. The judge looked at the stack of evidence folders and denied bail immediately. Nathan turned to look at Mom and mouthed something before the guards pulled him away. The hospital review board called Mom in the next morning for their final decision about her license. She wore her best suit and brought 3 binders of continuing education certificates she'd completed online. They put her on probation for 18 months with required supervision for all patient sessions and extra training on recognizing manipulation tactics. Her supervisor, Dr. Chen, volunteered to be her mentor, and 2 other doctors shared stories about patients who fooled them too. The victim services coordinator helped us file paperwork for insurance coverage that paid for new locks and window sensors and family counseling twice a week. She showed us a thick folder of programs for crime victims, including therapy dogs and support groups, and emergency relocation funds if needed. Dad spent hours reading every document and highlighting sections about reimbursement for time off work. 3 weeks after Nathan's arrest, we sat down for dinner without anyone checking the locks first. Dad made Mom's favorite pasta, and we actually watched a whole episode of some cooking show without jumping at every noise outside. I slept 6 hours straight that night without any nightmares about Nathan standing in my room. The next Saturday morning, Alyssa texted asking if I wanted to walk to the corner store for snacks. Our parents had a whole discussion on the porch about whether it was safe and finally agreed if we stayed together and came straight back. We bought candy bars and chips and walked home holding the bags like trophies while our parents watched from the front steps. Detective Rawlings stopped by the next week with news that made Mom cry with relief. They arrested 2 administrators from the forum where Nathan organized everything and shut down 3 mirror sites. She was working with federal agents now to track similar networks and prevent copycat cases. Mom shook her hand for a long time and kept saying thank you over and over. My therapist helped me create a safety checklist during our session that included trusting gut feelings and telling adults about anything weird. I shared it with the school counselor who made copies for other students and asked if I'd be willing to speak at an assembly next year about recognizing dangerous situations. The thought made me nervous, but I said maybe if Alyssa could do it with me. The victim advocate connected us with 3 other families whose doctors were targeted by the forum. We met at a community center conference room with coffee and cookies that nobody really ate. One family from 2 states away was 8 months past their incident, and the mom talked about how they learned to feel normal again. Another family's daughter was in college now and said the fear never fully goes away, but it stops controlling your life. Hearing their stories made ours feel less crazy and more like something that happened to real people who survived. We exchanged phone numbers and started a group text for bad days when the fear came back strong. Gary sent funny memes to lighten the mood, and someone always responded within minutes to remind us we weren't alone. The forum administrator's arrest led to more evidence about the network, and prosecutors said Nathan would face federal charges too. Mom had to give another statement about the stolen prescription pad and badge, which could add 10 more years to his sentence. Every bit of evidence meant more time before we'd have to worry about him getting out. 6 months would pass before the trial, but at least we were learning to live again between the court dates and safety protocols. The prosecutor called Mom when Nathan's competency evaluation came back and said he was fit to stand trial and would probably get 15 to 20 years based on the evidence. His accomplice took a plea deal for 5 years with possible parole after 3. Mom hung up and just sat at the kitchen table for a while before telling us the news. Dad made coffee and we all sat together not really talking, but feeling safer knowing there would be real consequences. The hospital finally cleared Mom to return to work, but only with her supervisor sitting in on every patient session for the first 3 months. She spent weeks developing new protocols for recognizing manipulation, based on everything Nathan had done, and the hospital administrators actually listened and made them standard across all departments. Other doctors started asking her advice about their own difficult patients, and she helped them spot warning signs she'd missed with Nathan. We started looking at houses in February and found one in the same school district with better locks and a security system already installed. The realtor kept showing us the kitchen and bedrooms, but Mom and Dad mostly checked sight lines from the street and whether the windows had good locks. Alyssa came with us to see it and joked we should dig a moat around it, which made everyone laugh for the first time in months. Moving day felt like starting over, even though we kept checking over our shoulders and testing all the new locks twice. Nathan's trial started in April, and the prosecutor had so much evidence it only took the jury 2 hours to convict him on all charges. The judge gave him 18 years without parole, and Mom didn't go to the sentencing, but read the transcript later, where Nathan still blamed her for rejecting his love. Detective Rawlings called after and said his delusions would never go away, but at least he'd be locked up until I was in my 30s. The victim advocate asked if we wanted to share our story with other families going through similar situations, and we all said yes. Dad got really into it and started creating resource packets for families dealing with the legal system after a stalking incident. We met with 3 other families that summer and shared what we learned about safety planning and recognizing fixation behaviors. Alyssa and I started our senior year together, and people at the school had mostly stopped asking about what happened, though some kids still whispered when we walked by. We both applied to colleges with good psychology programs and wrote our application essays about how our experience made us want to help others. The guidance counselor said our essays were powerful, but suggested we also write about other interests, so we wouldn't be defined by one terrible event. Graduation day was sunny, and both our families sat together with Gary manning the grill at the celebration afterward. We took pictures and ate hamburgers, and for a few hours it felt like any normal graduation party, except for how our parents kept scanning the crowd. Mom's work with the new safety protocols got noticed by other hospitals, and she started getting invited to speak at conferences. The hospital promoted her to department head with a focus on threat assessment, and she developed screening tools that could identify dangerous fixations early. She traveled to train staff at other facilities, and always came back with stories about doctors who thanked her for helping them avoid their own Nathan situations. I started college that fall, living in the dorms, but coming home every weekend at first. Alyssa went to a school 2 hours away, but we texted constantly and visited each other once a month. We both took intro psychology classes, and our professors had no idea why we already knew so much about personality disorders and threat assessment. Sophomore year, we both got internships at victim advocacy centers and realized we were actually good at helping people feel less alone. Our families stayed close with dinners every few weeks, and Gary still made jokes about the moat whenever we talked about home security. Mom published her screening protocols in a medical journal, and suddenly she was getting calls from hospitals all over asking for training. Dad framed the article and hung it in his office next to pictures of our family looking happy and safe. 3 years passed with no word about Nathan except annual victim notifications that he was still in the same prison. The fear faded into background noise that only got loud on certain anniversaries or when someone mentioned crossword puzzles. I graduated college and started a master's program in clinical psychology, focusing on trauma recovery. Mom's protocols were being used in psychiatric facilities across the country, and she estimated they'd prevented dozens of dangerous situations. Dad still volunteered with victim advocacy groups and had helped over 50 families navigate the court system. Alyssa was in law school planning to become a victims' rights attorney, and we still talked every week about everything and nothing. 5 years after that terrible day at the hospital, I was sitting in my graduate school library studying for comprehensive exams when I realized I hadn't thought about Nathan in weeks. Mom was speaking at a national conference about her threat assessment tools that were saving lives every day. Dad had his own support group for families of stalking victims that met monthly at the community center. Our family bonds had become unbreakable through everything we survived together, and Nathan was just a footnote now in our story of learning to help others avoid what we went through. That's everything I wanted to share. If one part of it stuck with you, then it was worth telling. Hit subscribe and let's keep building on it.